William stood at the window of his small apartment, watching the rain trace patterns down the glass. He had just turned 23 and life felt like an endless stretch of possibilities. He worked at a local bookstore, a quiet job that suited his gentle nature. Every morning he would unlock the door, breathe in the smell of old pages, and lose himself in the stories that surrounded him. Catherine walked into his life on a Tuesday afternoon in March. She had been searching for a specific poetry collection, something obscure that William happened to know by heart. Her eyes lit up when he pulled the exact book from a high shelf without even checking the computer. She had dark curly hair that fell past her shoulders, and when she smiled, tiny lines appeared at the corners of her eyes. They started talking about books, then about music, then about everything and nothing.
Catherine came back the next day and the day after that.
Soon it became their routine. She would arrive around 3 in the afternoon, after her shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. William would have her favorite tea ready, and they would sit in the corner of the bookstore talking until closing time. Their friendship blossomed slowly, like a flower opening its petals one by one. William found himself thinking about her during his morning commute, wondering what stories she would share that day. Catherine would catch herself smiling at work, remembering something funny William had said. Neither of them rushed to label what they had. It felt precious, fragile, like something that needed to grow at its own pace. 6 months after they met, William finally gathered the courage to ask Catherine to dinner. Not at the bookstore, not over tea and conversation between the shelves, but a real dinner at a real restaurant. She said yes before he even finished his sentence. That night, under the glow of streetlights and the hum of the city around them, they held hands for the first time. It felt right, natural, like their fingers had been waiting to intertwine. Their relationship deepened with each passing season. William learned that Catherine loved to dance in the kitchen while cooking, that she cried during sad movies but tried to hide it, that she had a laugh that could light up the darkest room. Catherine discovered that William wrote poetry in the margins of old books, that he was afraid of thunderstorms but would never admit it, that he had a way of making everyone around him feel seen and valued. They moved in together after a year, finding a small apartment with a balcony that overlooked the park. It was not much, but it was theirs. They painted the walls together, choosing a soft blue for the bedroom and a warm yellow for the kitchen. Catherine hung pictures of their adventures, while William filled the shelves with books they both loved. Every corner of that apartment held a memory, a moment of laughter or quiet comfort. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm. William would wake up early to make coffee, always adding just the right amount of cream to Catherine's cup. She would leave little notes for him before her shifts, tucked into his lunch bag or slipped between the pages of whatever book he was reading. They had their routines, their small rituals that made their life together feel like home. On weekends, they would explore the city, finding new cafes and hidden bookstores, walking through neighborhoods they had never visited before. Catherine loved to take pictures of everything, capturing moments that seemed ordinary but felt extraordinary when viewed through her eyes. William would write about these adventures, turning their simple outings into stories filled with wonder and magic. Their friends often commented on how perfect they seemed together, how they balanced each other in ways that felt effortless. William brought calm to Catherine's sometimes chaotic energy, while she pushed him to be more adventurous, to step outside his comfort zone. They complemented each other, two pieces of a puzzle that fit together seamlessly. But beneath the surface of their happiness, something was changing. Catherine had been feeling tired lately, more than usual. She blamed it on long shifts at the hospital, on the stress of her job. William noticed but did not push, trusting that she would tell him if something was wrong. He made her favorite meals, ran her baths after difficult days, held her close when she needed comfort without words. Then came the doctor's appointment that changed everything. Catherine had finally agreed to get checked out, thinking it was probably nothing, maybe just anemia or exhaustion. William went with her, holding her hand in the waiting room, making jokes to ease her nerves. They were called in together, and the doctor's face told them everything before any words were spoken. The diagnosis hit them like a freight train. Catherine had a rare heart condition, something that had been hiding in her body for years, slowly progressing without any obvious symptoms. The doctor explained the treatment options, the surgeries, the medications, but William could barely hear the words. All he could focus on was Catherine's hand in his, trembling slightly, her grip tightening with each passing second. They drove home in silence, both lost in their own thoughts, trying to process what they had just learned. When they finally made it back to their apartment, Catherine broke down. William held her as she cried, his own tears falling silently into her hair. They stayed like that for hours, clinging to each other, afraid to let go, afraid of what the future might hold. The next few weeks were a blur of appointments, tests, and consultations. Catherine tried to stay positive, researching her condition, talking to specialists, exploring every possible option. William supported her in every way he could, but inside he was terrified. He could not imagine a world without her laughter, without her presence filling their home with light and warmth. They made a decision together to fight, to try everything possible. Catherine underwent the first surgery, and William barely left her side. He slept in uncomfortable hospital chairs, held her hand through the pain, whispered words of encouragement when she felt like giving up. The surgery was successful, but it was only the beginning of a long journey. The months following the surgery were difficult in ways neither William nor Catherine had anticipated. The physical recovery was hard enough, with Catherine spending weeks building back her strength, learning to walk without getting dizzy, adjusting to new medications that made her feel nauseous and tired. But the emotional toll was even harder to bear. Catherine had always been independent, the kind of person who took care of others and rarely asked for help. Now she needed assistance with the simplest tasks. William had to help her shower, remind her to take her pills, support her as she walked from the bedroom to the living room. She hated feeling weak, hated depending on him for everything. There were days when frustration would bubble over and she would snap at him for no reason, then immediately apologize with tears in her eyes. William never complained. He took a leave of absence from the bookstore, dedicating himself entirely to Catherine's care. He learned how to check her vitals, how to recognize warning signs, how to prepare meals that would not upset her sensitive stomach. He became her nurse, her companion, her anchor in a storm that seemed endless. But the weight of it all pressed down on him, and there were nights when he would step out onto their balcony and let silent tears fall, careful not to let Catherine see his fear. Their friends tried to help, bringing meals and offering to sit with Catherine so William could rest. But Catherine felt embarrassed by her condition, uncomfortable with people seeing her so vulnerable. She started withdrawing, canceling visits, insisting she just needed time. William understood but worried about her isolation. The woman who used to fill their home with laughter and music now spent most days staring out the window, lost in thoughts she would not share. 3 months after the surgery, Catherine seemed to be improving. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, and she started to regain some of her energy. She could walk without assistance, could handle most daily tasks on her own. William felt a surge of hope, thinking maybe they had turned a corner. Maybe the worst was behind them. They started making plans again, talking about the future, about trips they would take once she was fully recovered. But then came the setback. Catherine woke up one morning struggling to breathe, her chest tight with pain. William rushed her to the hospital, his hands shaking on the steering wheel, praying under his breath for her to be okay. The doctors ran tests and discovered that complications had developed. Her heart was weaker than they had hoped, and she needed another surgery, more invasive than the first. This news broke something in Catherine. She had been fighting so hard, had endured so much pain and uncertainty, and now she was being told it was not enough. She looked at William with eyes full of exhaustion and whispered that she was tired, so tired of fighting. He held her hand and begged her not to give up, reminded her of all the reasons she had to keep going. But he could see the light in her eyes dimming, the hope that had sustained her slowly fading away. The second surgery was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In that time, Catherine made a difficult decision. She told William that if this surgery did not work, if her body could not handle another round of treatment, she did not want to keep fighting indefinitely. She wanted quality of life over quantity, wanted to spend whatever time she had left actually living instead of trapped in hospital rooms. William wanted to argue, wanted to tell her to never give up, but he could see the resolve in her expression. He agreed to respect her wishes even though it broke his heart. They spent those 3 weeks living as fully as they could. Catherine felt well enough to go on short walks, and they would stroll through the park near their apartment hand in hand, savoring the feeling of sunshine on their faces. William took her to their favorite places, The little cafe where they had their first date, the bookstore where they met, the bridge overlooking the river where he had first told her he loved her. Each location felt like a goodbye, though neither of them said it out loud. Catherine started writing letters, one for William and others for the people who mattered most to her. She filled the pages with memories, with gratitude, with love that poured out in words she might never get to say in person. She sealed them in envelopes and tucked them away, hoping they would never need to be opened, but finding comfort in having her thoughts preserved. William did not ask what she was writing. He knew, and he was not ready to acknowledge what those letters meant. On the night before the surgery, they lay in bed together, neither of them sleeping. Catherine traced patterns on William's chest with her fingers, memorizing the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. He held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, feeling the warmth of her body against his. They did not talk about the surgery or what might happen. Instead, they talked about their favorite memories, about the day they met, about the moment William knew he was in love with her. Catherine laughed softly, remembering how nervous he had been on their first date, how he had spilled water on the table and apologized 3 times. William smiled, recalling how she had reached across and taken his hand, telling him to relax, that she was nervous too. Those early days felt like a lifetime ago, back when their biggest worry was whether to order dessert or not. Now they were facing something so much bigger, something that could not be solved with a reassuring touch or a kind word. As dawn broke, they got ready in silence. William helped Catherine dress, his hands gentle and careful. She looked at herself in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back. She had lost weight, her face was pale, and there were dark circles under her eyes. But when she looked at William's reflection beside hers, she saw love so pure and deep that it took her breath away. He was still looking at her the same way he had on their first date, like she was the most beautiful person in the world. At the hospital, they went through the pre-surgery routine with practiced efficiency. Catherine changed into the hospital gown, answered the nurse's questions, signed the consent forms. William stayed by her side through it all, his presence a constant source of comfort. When it was time for her to be taken to the operating room, they had one final moment together. William cupped her face in his hands, looking into her eyes with an intensity that made her heart ache. He told her he loved her, that he believed in her strength, that he would be right there waiting when she woke up. Catherine smiled, tears streaming down her face, and whispered that loving him had been the greatest gift of her life. They kissed, soft and tender, a kiss that held years of devotion and unspoken promises. Then she was wheeled away, and William stood alone in the hallway, watching until she disappeared through the operating room doors. The waiting room became William's world for the next 8 hours. He paced back and forth, unable to sit still for more than a few minutes at a time. Other families came and went, some receiving good news with tears of relief, others leaving with expressions of devastation. William tried not to look at them, tried not to imagine which category he would fall into when the surgeon finally emerged with news about Catherine. His phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from friends and family asking for updates. He could not bring himself to respond to most of them, managing only brief replies to let them know the surgery was still ongoing. Catherine's mother had wanted to come, but Catherine had insisted she stay home, not wanting her to make the long journey and spend hours worrying in a hospital waiting room. William wondered if that had been the right decision, if Catherine's mother would regret not being there. Around hour 6, William's exhaustion caught up with him. He slumped into a chair, his head falling back against the wall, eyes closing for just a moment. In that brief respite, he dreamed of Catherine as she was when they first met, vibrant and full of life, laughing at something he had said, her whole face lighting up with joy. He woke with a start, disoriented, his heart racing with the sudden fear that he had missed the doctor coming out with news. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the surgeon appeared. William jumped to his feet, searching the doctor's face for any hint of what he was about to hear. The surgeon's expression was neutral, professional, giving nothing away until he spoke. The surgery had gone as well as could be expected, he explained. They had repaired the damage and reinforced the weak areas of Catherine's heart. But the next 48 hours would be critical. Her body had been through significant trauma, and they needed to watch carefully for any signs of complications. William felt his knees go weak with relief mixed with continued anxiety. Catherine had survived the surgery, but she was not out of danger yet. The surgeon led him to the intensive care unit, preparing him for what he was about to see. Nothing could have truly prepared him for the sight of Catherine surrounded by machines, tubes running from her arms, a ventilator breathing for her. She looked so small in that hospital bed, so fragile, like a strong wind could carry her away. He pulled a chair close to her bedside and took her hand, careful of the IV lines. Her skin felt cool to the touch, and he rubbed his thumb gently across her knuckles, willing his warmth into her. The machines beeped steadily, monitoring every aspect of her vital signs, each sound a reassurance that she was still here, still fighting. William talked to her even though she could not hear him, telling her about how much he loved her, about all the things they would do once she recovered. The first night was the longest of William's life. Nurses came in every hour to check Catherine's vitals, adjusting medications, making notes on charts. William watched their faces for any sign of concern, his stomach clenching every time someone frowned at a monitor or whispered to a colleague. But the night passed without incident, and when morning came, the doctor seemed cautiously pleased with Catherine's progress. On the second day, they began reducing the sedation, allowing Catherine to slowly wake up. William held his breath as her eyelids fluttered, as she struggled against the ventilator tube. The medical team worked quickly to remove it, and Catherine gasped for air, her eyes wild with confusion and fear. William leaned in close, speaking softly, telling her she was okay, that the surgery was over, that he was right there with her. Recognition slowly dawned in her eyes, and she squeezed his hand weakly. Her voice was barely a whisper when she finally spoke, asking if it had worked, if her heart was okay now. William felt tears stream down his face as he nodded, telling her the surgery had been successful, that the doctors were hopeful. Catherine closed her eyes, a single tear escaping and rolling down her temple. William wiped it away gently, overwhelmed with gratitude that she was awake, that she was talking, that she was still with him. The following days brought small improvements. Catherine was moved from the ICU to a regular recovery room. She could sit up in bed, could drink water without feeling nauseous, could stay awake for longer periods. William never left her side except when the nurses insisted he go home to shower and rest. Even then, he was back within hours, unable to stay away, needing to see for himself that she was okay. Catherine's recovery was slow, but steady. Physical therapists came to help her walk, first just a few steps from the bed to the chair, then gradually increasing the distance. William walked beside her, his hand hovering near her elbow, ready to catch her if she stumbled. She was determined, pushing herself even when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. The spark that had seemed so diminished before the surgery was beginning to return, flickering back to life with each small victory. 2 weeks after the surgery, Catherine was discharged from the hospital. William brought her home to their apartment, which he had cleaned from top to bottom, filling it with fresh flowers and all of her favorite things. She cried when she walked through the door, overwhelmed by the familiar surroundings, by the realization that she was truly home. William helped her to the couch, tucking blankets around her, making sure she was comfortable before allowing himself to relax. The first month home was an adjustment. Catherine was restricted in what she could do, forbidden from lifting anything heavy, required to rest frequently. William took leave from work again, wanting to be there for every moment of her recovery. They fell into a new routine, gentler than before but filled with hope. Catherine would rest on the couch while William read to her from their favorite books. They would watch old movies together, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm wrapped protectively around her. Friends started visiting again, bringing meals and good wishes. Catherine found it easier to accept help now, understanding that people wanted to support them, that letting others in was not a sign of weakness, but of strength. Her mother came to stay for a week, and William was grateful for the extra hands, for someone who could sit with Catherine when he needed to step out for groceries or appointments. 3 months post-surgery, Catherine returned to the hospital for a follow-up. William went with her, his stomach tight with nervousness despite the doctor's previous optimism. They sat together in the examination room, hands clasped, waiting for the cardiologist to review the latest test results. When the doctor finally came in, he was smiling. The surgery had been a complete success. Catherine's heart was functioning well, stronger than it had been in years. She would need to continue with medications and regular checkups, but the prognosis was excellent. The relief William felt in that moment was indescribable. He pulled Catherine into his arms, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. They had made it through the darkest period of their lives and come out the other side. Catherine whispered thank you against his chest, thanking him for never giving up on her, for being her rock when everything else felt unstable. William held her tighter, knowing he would do it all again without hesitation if it meant keeping her in his life. That night, they celebrated quietly at home with takeout from their favorite restaurant and a bottle of sparkling cider. They toasted to second chances, to the medical team that had saved Catherine's life, to their love that had weathered an impossible storm. As they sat on their balcony watching the sun set over the city, William felt a peace he had not known in months. Catherine was going to be okay. They were going to be okay. 6 months after the surgery, life had returned to something resembling normal, though both William and Catherine knew they would never be quite the same people they were before. The experience had changed them, made them more aware of how precious and fragile life could be. They no longer took simple moments for granted, finding joy in things they had previously overlooked. Catherine returned to work part-time at the hospital, though she had switched to a less demanding role in patient education rather than floor nursing. She enjoyed teaching people about heart health, about recognizing warning signs, about advocating for themselves with doctors. Her own experience gave her a unique perspective, and patients responded to her authenticity and compassion. William could see how much the work meant to her, how it gave her a sense of purpose beyond her illness. William went back to the bookstore, grateful to return to the familiar routine of shelving books and helping customers. His manager had held his position for him, understanding that family came first. His co-workers welcomed him back with warm hugs and genuine concern for Catherine. The bookstore felt like a sanctuary, a place where William could lose himself in stories and forget, at least for a few hours, about hospital visits and medication schedules. They started going out more, reclaiming pieces of their life that had been put on hold. Weekend brunches with friends, evening walks through the park, lazy Sunday mornings spent reading the newspaper over coffee. Each outing felt special, tinged with an appreciation they had not had before. Catherine would sometimes grab William's hand and squeeze it, a silent acknowledgement that they were lucky to be experiencing these ordinary moments together. But beneath the surface of their renewed happiness, something was shifting. Catherine had been given a second chance at life, and she was becoming increasingly aware of how she wanted to spend it. She started talking about dreams she had set aside, places she wanted to visit, experiences she had always postponed for someday. She wanted to see the ocean, to travel to cities they had only read about in books, to live more adventurously than their quiet routine allowed. William listened to her dreams with a mixture of excitement and concern. He wanted to give her everything she desired, but he also worried about her health, about pushing too hard too fast. The doctors had cleared her for travel, but he could not shake the fear that something might go wrong when they were far from home, far from the medical team that knew her case. He tried to hide his anxiety, not wanting to dim her enthusiasm, but Catherine could sense his hesitation. They had their first real argument about it on a rainy evening in November. Catherine had found a great deal on flights to the coast and wanted to book a trip for the following month. William hemmed and hawed, listing reasons why they should wait, why it might be too soon. Catherine's frustration boiled over, accusing him of treating her like she was made of glass, of not trusting that she knew her own limits. William shot back that he was just trying to keep her safe, that he could not bear the thought of losing her. The words hung heavy in the air between them. Catherine's anger deflated, replaced by understanding. She crossed the room and took his hands, looking up at him with tears in her eyes. She told him she understood his fear because she carried it too every single day. But she could not live the rest of her life afraid of what might happen. She needed to feel alive, to prove to herself that she was more than her illness, more than a patient who had survived. William pulled her into an embrace, acknowledging that she was right. He had been holding on too tightly, trying to protect her from a world he could not control. He promised to be better, to trust in her strength, to support her dreams even when they scared him. Catherine held him back just as tightly, grateful for his honesty, for his willingness to work through their differences rather than letting them fester. They booked the trip to the coast, and the anticipation gave them both something to look forward to. Catherine researched restaurants and walking trails, planning every detail with the enthusiasm of a child preparing for their first vacation. William bought a new camera, wanting to capture every moment of their adventure. In the weeks leading up to the trip, their apartment buzzed with excitement and nervous energy. The trip itself was magical. They stayed in a small cottage overlooking the water, falling asleep to the sound of waves and waking up to stunning sunrises. Catherine stood at the edge of the beach with her arms spread wide, breathing in the salt air, feeling more alive than she had in years. William took picture after picture, wanting to preserve the joy on her face, the way the wind whipped her hair around her shoulders, the pure freedom in her expression. They walked along the shore for hours, collecting shells and watching seabirds dive for fish. Catherine talked about her childhood dreams of living by the ocean, of becoming a marine biologist before she decided to pursue nursing. William listened, learning things about her he had never known, reminded that even after years together there were still depths to discover. They ate fresh seafood at a tiny restaurant with checkered tablecloths and friendly waiters who treated them like family. On their last night at the coast, they sat on the beach under a blanket of stars. Catherine leaned against William's chest, his arms wrapped around her, both of them quiet in the peaceful darkness. She told him this had been one of the best weeks of her life, that it had reminded her of why fighting through the surgeries and pain had been worth it. William kissed the top of her head, grateful they had taken the risk, that he had pushed past his fear to give her this experience. When they returned home, something had shifted between them. They were more intentional about their life together, making plans for the future but also living fully in the present. They started a tradition of trying a new restaurant every month, of taking weekend road trips to nearby towns, of saying yes to opportunities that previously might have seemed too complicated or risky. Catherine's zest for life was infectious, pulling William out of his natural caution and into a more adventurous existence. Catherine went back to the hospital for her regular checkup in January, a full year after the surgery. The results were excellent. Her heart was functioning beautifully, and the cardiologist was thrilled with her progress. He reduced some of her medications and cleared her for even more physical activity. Catherine practically floated out of the hospital, her relief and joy palpable. William took her out for a celebratory dinner, toasting to her health, to the future, to the beautiful life they were building together. But that night, as they lay in bed, Catherine turned to William with a serious expression. She told him there was something she needed to say, something she had been thinking about for months. William's heart quickened, worried about what might come next. Catherine took a deep breath and told him that while she was doing well now, they both knew her condition could change. Her heart would always be a concern, and there were no guarantees about the future. She wanted to make sure he understood that she did not expect him to stay if things became difficult again, if her health declined. She loved him too much to watch him sacrifice his entire life taking care of her. William stopped her mid-sentence, his voice firm but gentle. He told her that loving her was not a sacrifice, that caring for her during the hardest times had not been a burden, but a privilege. He was not going anywhere, no matter what the future held. Catherine's eyes filled with tears as she listened to his words. She had needed to hear it, needed to know that he was choosing her, choosing them, with full knowledge of what might lie ahead. William wiped away her tears and reminded her that everyone's future was uncertain. Nobody was guaranteed tomorrow. What mattered was how they spent the time they had, and he wanted to spend every moment he could with her. Spring arrived with its usual promise of renewal, and Catherine seemed to bloom along with the flowers in their small balcony garden. She had more energy than she had in years, her cheeks had color again, and the light in her eyes burned bright. William watched her with constant amazement, grateful for every healthy day they shared. They had settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable, balanced between caution and living fully. In April, Catherine started feeling unusually tired again. At first, she dismissed it as the result of picking up extra shifts at work. But when the fatigue persisted and she started experiencing occasional dizziness, William insisted she call her cardiologist. Neither of them wanted to admit how scared they were, how quickly the familiar fear could resurface after months of feeling secure. The cardiologist ordered blood work and a series of tests. William took the day off to accompany Catherine to the appointment, both of them tense with worry as they sat in the waiting room. They held hands without speaking, each lost in their own anxious thoughts. When the doctor finally called them in, his expression was unreadable, and William felt his stomach drop. But the news was not what they expected. Catherine's heart was fine, functioning exactly as it should. The fatigue and dizziness had a completely different cause. Catherine was pregnant. The words seemed to hang in the air, impossible to process. The doctor explained that while rare, it was not unheard of for pregnancy to occur despite Catherine's heart condition and medications. He cautioned that this would be considered a high-risk pregnancy and would require careful monitoring, but it was possible. Catherine and William left the hospital in a state of shock. They drove home in silence, both trying to wrap their minds around this unexpected development. They had never discussed having children. After Catherine's diagnosis, it had seemed like an impossibility, something to file away with other dreams they had reluctantly surrendered. And now, suddenly, it was happening whether they had planned for it or not. That evening, they sat together on their couch, the weight of the decision before them settling heavily on their shoulders. Catherine's doctor had been clear that continuing the pregnancy carried risks. Her heart would be under additional strain, and there was no guarantee how her body would handle it. But terminating the pregnancy was also not a simple decision, not something either of them could consider lightly. Catherine cried for hours, overwhelmed by the complexity of emotions swirling inside her. Part of her was terrified, knowing that pregnancy could jeopardize her health, could undo all the progress she had made. But another part of her felt a fierce, protective love for this tiny life growing inside her, a love she had not anticipated feeling. She looked at William with red, swollen eyes and asked him what he thought they should do. William felt torn in ways he could not articulate. His first instinct was to protect Catherine, to eliminate any risk to her health. But he also saw the longing in her eyes, the maternal instinct awakening despite the fear. He told her honestly that he was scared, that the thought of losing her was unbearable. But he also said that this was her body, her choice, and whatever she decided, he would support her completely. They spent the next week in deep discussion, consulting with specialists, researching cases of women with similar heart conditions who had carried pregnancies. The medical opinions were mixed. Some doctors strongly advised against continuing the pregnancy, while others thought it could be managed with careful monitoring and precautions. Catherine would need to stop certain medications, increase her appointments, potentially spend periods on bed rest. Catherine made her decision on a quiet Sunday morning. She told William that she wanted to continue the pregnancy, that she felt in her heart this was meant to be, despite the risks. She acknowledged her fear, but said that fear could not be the only factor in their decision. Life was full of risks, and they had already proven they could face difficult challenges together. William listened, his heart heavy with worry, but also swelling with admiration for her courage. They informed the medical team of their decision, and a comprehensive care plan was put in place. Catherine switched to a maternal fetal medicine specialist who had experience with high-risk cardiac patients. She would need weekly appointments to monitor both her heart function and the baby's development. William rearranged his work schedule, determined to attend every appointment, to be present for every step of this journey. The first trimester was challenging. Catherine's morning sickness was severe, complicated by her limited medication options. She lost weight when she needed to be gaining it, and her energy levels plummeted. William became her full-time caregiver, again, preparing small meals she could keep down, helping her to and from the bathroom when she was too weak to walk alone. The fear that had receded after her surgery recovery came roaring back, keeping him awake at night as he listened to her breathing, checking constantly to make sure she was okay. But they made it through those difficult first months. As Catherine entered her second trimester, things began to improve. Her nausea subsided and she started to regain her strength. Her belly began to show, a small but unmistakable curve that filled her with wonder every time she looked in the mirror. William would rest his hand on her stomach, feeling the baby, kick tears streaming down his face at the miracle of it all. They started preparing for the baby's arrival, turning their small spare room into a nursery. Catherine wanted to do as much as possible herself, painting the walls a soft green, choosing furniture that would keep the baby safe and comfortable. William helped with the heavy lifting but let her direct every decision, understanding how important it was for her to feel involved, to not be sidelined by her condition. Friends threw them a baby shower, filling their apartment with tiny clothes, diapers, and all the supplies new parents need. Catherine sat in the center of it all, glowing with happiness despite her obvious exhaustion. She had never looked more beautiful to William than she did in that moment, surrounded by people who loved them, carrying their child against all odds. He took a picture of her laughing at something someone said, wanting to remember this perfect afternoon forever. The third trimester brought new challenges. Catherine's heart was working harder, and she experienced frequent shortness of breath and swelling in her feet and hands. Her doctors monitored her closely, adjusting medications as needed, watching for any signs of heart failure. There were several trips to the hospital when her symptoms became concerning, each one sending William into panic mode until the doctors assured them things were stable. At 34 weeks, Catherine was admitted to the hospital for observation. Her blood pressure was elevated, and the doctors wanted to keep a close eye on both her and the baby. William moved into her hospital room, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed, refusing to leave her side. They passed the days watching television, playing card games, and talking about what their life would look like once the baby arrived. Catherine went into labor at 36 weeks. William was by her side, holding her hand, breathing through contractions with her. The delivery room was crowded with medical staff, the cardiac team on standby in case Catherine's heart showed signs of distress. The labor was long and difficult, Catherine's body struggling with the exertion. William whispered encouragement, wiped sweat from her forehead, told her how strong she was, how proud he was of her, and then after hours of labor they heard it. The sharp, clear cry of their baby filling the room. Catherine burst into tears as the nurses placed their daughter on her chest, this tiny, perfect human they had created against all odds. William leaned over them both, his hand cradling the baby's head, overwhelmed with love and relief. Their daughter had 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a healthy set of lungs that she was using to announce her arrival to the world. The medical team quickly checked Catherine's vitals, ensuring her heart had handled the delivery well. Everything looked good, better than they had hoped. Catherine was exhausted but stable, and the baby was healthy despite arriving a few weeks early. They had done it. They had brought their daughter safely into the world, and Catherine had survived the pregnancy she had been told was too dangerous to attempt. They named their daughter Emma, and she became the center of their universe. The first few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and the constant worry that comes with new parenthood. But Catherine and William navigated it together, taking turns with night wakings, supporting each other through the exhaustion. Catherine's heart was monitored closely in the postpartum period, and to everyone's relief, it remained stable. Emma was 3 months old when Catherine started feeling unwell again. It began subtly with tiredness that she attributed to the demands of caring for a newborn. But William noticed she was more out of breath than usual, that she struggled with tasks that should have been easy. When she fainted while holding Emma, William called an ambulance immediately, his hands shaking as he held their crying daughter, watching paramedics work on Catherine. At the hospital, the news was devastating. Catherine's heart had deteriorated significantly. The pregnancy, despite their careful monitoring, had taken a toll that was only now becoming apparent. The damage was extensive, and the doctors presented them with limited options. Catherine could undergo another surgery, but the risks were substantial, or she could try to manage with medication, though her quality of life would be severely limited and the prognosis was uncertain. Catherine and William sat in her hospital room, Emma sleeping in William's arms, and had the hardest conversation of their lives. Catherine was exhausted not just physically but emotionally. She had fought so hard for so long, had survived surgery and pregnancy and countless setbacks. She looked at William and their daughter and told him she was ready to stop fighting. She wanted whatever time she had left to be spent at home with them, making memories, rather than in hospitals undergoing treatments that might not work. William wanted to argue, wanted to beg her to try the surgery, to keep fighting, but when he looked into her eyes, he saw a peacefulness he had not seen in years. She had made her decision with clarity and conviction. She wanted to live, not just survive. She wanted to hold Emma without tubes and wires, to be present for the moments they had left, rather than chasing a future that might never come. William held her hand and promised to respect her wishes, even though it shattered his heart. They brought Catherine home with hospice support. The apartment they had filled with so much love now took on a different atmosphere, one of cherishing every moment. Catherine's parents came to stay, helping with Emma and allowing Catherine to conserve her energy for the time she felt well enough to be fully present. William took extended leave from work, knowing these days with Catherine were more precious than anything else in his life. Catherine had good days and bad days. On the good days, she would sit in the rocking chair William had placed by the window, holding Emma, singing softly, sunlight streaming across them both. William would watch them from the doorway, imprinting the image in his memory, knowing he would carry it with him forever. On the bad days, Catherine could barely get out of bed, and William would bring Emma to her, laying their daughter beside her so Catherine could feel her warmth, smell her baby scent. Friends and family came to visit, saying their goodbyes, though nobody used that word. They brought meals and flowers and stories that made Catherine laugh. Her hospital colleagues came, some of them in tears, telling her how much she had meant to them, how her work had touched so many lives. Catherine received these visits with grace, telling everyone not to be sad, that she had lived a beautiful life full of love. In the quiet moments, Catherine talked to William about the future. She made him promise to take care of himself, to let people help him, to not shut down his heart after she was gone. She wanted him to eventually find love again, though the thought of it made her ache. She wanted Emma to know her, and so she wrote letters for every milestone, birthdays and graduations, and her wedding day. She recorded videos of herself talking to Emma, sharing stories and advice and all the love she would not be there to give in person. William struggled with the reality of what was coming. Some nights after Catherine fell asleep, he would sit on the balcony and sob, grieving for the future they would not have, for all the moments Catherine would miss with Emma. But in the daylight, he was strong for her, telling her stories, reminiscing about their favorite memories, holding her when she needed comfort. On a warm evening in late summer, with windows open and a gentle breeze flowing through their bedroom, Catherine called William and Emma to her. She had been sleeping most of the day, conserving her energy, but now she was awake and clear-eyed, wanting to be present for what she somehow knew were her final hours. William climbed into bed beside her, cradling Emma between them. Catherine looked at them both with such profound love that William had to bite his lip to keep from breaking down. She told William again how much she loved him, how meeting him had been the best thing that ever happened to her. She thanked him for the beautiful life they had built, for supporting her dreams, for being her partner through every storm. She apologized for leaving him, for not being there to raise Emma alongside him. William shook his head, tears streaming down his face, telling her she had nothing to apologize for, that loving her had been the greatest privilege of his life. Catherine placed her hand on Emma's tiny chest, feeling her daughter's heartbeat strong and steady. She whispered a prayer that Emma would grow up knowing she was loved, that her short time with her mother had been filled with nothing but devotion. She asked William to tell Emma about her, to keep her memory alive, to let their daughter know that even though she could not stay, she had loved her with every fiber of her being. As the evening deepened into night, Catherine's breathing became more labored. William held her close, Emma sleeping peacefully between them. He whispered words of love and comfort, telling Catherine it was okay to let go, that he would be okay, that Emma would be okay. He thanked her for fighting as long as she had, for giving him Emma, for years of memories he would treasure forever. Catherine's last words were simple and perfect. She looked at William, her hand squeezing his weakly, and whispered that she had no regrets, that if she could live her life over again, she would not change a thing because every moment had led her to him, to Emma, to this life they had created together. William kissed her forehead, telling her he loved her, that he would always love her, and then, with the man she loved beside her and her daughter sleeping peacefully, Catherine took her last breath. It was quiet and gentle, like falling asleep after a long, exhausting day. William held her for hours, unable to let go, rocking Emma, who had begun to fuss, his tears falling onto both of them. The room was silent except for Emma's soft sounds and William's quiet crying. The funeral was held on a clear autumn day, the sky impossibly blue. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects, a testament to how many lives Catherine had touched. William stood at the front holding Emma, listening to people share stories about Catherine's kindness, her courage, her infectious laugh. He gave a brief eulogy, his voice breaking as he tried to capture what Catherine had meant to him, knowing no words would ever be enough. In the months that followed, William learned to navigate life as a single father. Some days were unbearable, the grief hitting him in waves that threatened to drown him, but he had Emma and she needed him to keep going. He returned to work at the bookstore, where his co-workers gave him grace as he adjusted to his new reality. Catherine's mother helped with childcare, and slowly, painfully, William built a life around the hole Catherine had left. He kept his promises to her. He told Emma stories about her mother every day, showing her pictures and videos, making sure she knew Catherine's voice even if she would not remember it herself. On hard days, he would read Catherine's letters, drawing strength from her words, from knowing she had faith in his ability to be the father Emma needed. As Emma grew, William saw Catherine in her smile, in her laugh, in the way she approached the world with curious wonder. He taught her to love books the way he did, took her to the places he and Catherine had loved. He joined a grief support group and slowly began to heal, not forgetting Catherine but learning to carry his love for her alongside the life he was still living. Years later, standing at Emma's elementary school graduation, William felt Catherine's presence so strongly it took his breath away. Emma had just received an award for kindness, and William knew Catherine would have been so proud. He whispered to her wherever she was, telling her their daughter was amazing, that he was doing his best, that he still loved her and always would. Life had not turned out the way William had planned. The goodbye he and Catherine had shared was drenched in more tears than he thought possible, but their story was not defined by its ending. It was defined by the love they shared, the courage Catherine showed, the beautiful life they built together in the time they had. And in Emma, that love continued, a living testament to a woman who had faced impossible odds with grace and determination, who had given everything to create one more life, one more piece of the future. William smiled through his tears at Emma's graduation, knowing that Catherine's legacy was not in how long she lived, but in how fully she had loved.